The Intergalactic Assembly convened in the Grand Hall of the Cosmos, a colossal, pristine structure at the heart of the Zenthian Confederacy. Alien species from every corner of the universe gathered, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. The assembly was a melting pot of cultures, technologies, and ideologies, united by one singular, unspoken rule: the humans had to comply. For centuries, humanity had been the subject of countless negotiations, treaties, and alliances, each one designed to tether Earth's volatile species into a predictable, manageable orbit within galactic society. And for the most part, humans had played along, well, at least to the letter of the law, if not the spirit. But now, humanity was growing, expanding its influence in the stars. Its ships had breached the limits of the Milky Way, its colonies flourished across distant systems, and its people's resilience and tenacity had earned them respect from even the most powerful of species. Still, the Zenthian Confederacy, the most dominant and bureaucratic alliance in the galaxy, had never been fully convinced that humans would follow the rules that had kept the galaxy in check for millennia. These rules were simple in their design: no one species could rise too quickly, no one power could challenge the existing order. The Confederacy's diplomats, backed by fleets of warships, had always assumed that humanity, in its unpolished, chaotic form, would never think to break those rules. But what they didn't realize was that humans had never been good at following rules in the first place. The negotiation table was set in the heart of the Grand Hall, a shimmering display of floating holograms and interactive screens, each one reflecting the various species that had gathered. The Zenthian delegates, tall, sleek, with bioluminescent skin that pulsed in rhythm with their thoughts, sat at one end, their eyes glowing with expectation. At the opposite end sat the humans, led by President Angela Rourke, a battle-hardened politician who had seen more than her fair share of galactic crises. She wasn't here to make friends, she was here to ensure humanity's place in the stars. "The rules are clear," said Ambassador Verrett, the Zenthian chief diplomat, his voice smooth and cold. His hands hovered in the air, manipulating the holographic charts. "Humanity must submit to the order of the Confederacy. You may expand, but only within the limits we set. Your military must be constrained. Your exploration and colonization must adhere to our regulations. Failure to comply will result in sanctions and consequences." Angela's gaze never wavered, her expression a perfect mask of confidence. She had heard this all before. She had been briefed on it, and the tactics of fear and control no longer intimidated her. "Ambassador," she said, her voice calm but firm, "humans don't submit. We never have. We create. We build. We forge our own path." There was a brief silence, the kind that often preceded a moment of calculated tension. The Zenthian delegates exchanged looks. Some sneered, others shifted uncomfortably. They had never faced a species so openly defiant. "You're making a mistake, President Rourke," Verrett continued, his tone icy. "We've allowed your species to grow, but that has limits. Your expansion threatens the delicate balance of power we've maintained for millennia." Rourke leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I think you misunderstand something, Ambassador. We didn't ask for permission to grow. And we're not asking for permission to keep growing. Humanity doesn't play by your rules. Never has. Never will." The words hit like a shockwave. The air seemed to crackle with a sudden tension, a palpable shift in the room. The Zenthian delegates recoiled, their calm, calculated demeanor now tinged with the flickers of uncertainty. Across the hall, General Marcus Davis, Rourke's military advisor, stood at attention, his arms crossed. He'd been waiting for this moment. He knew what the humans were capable of when backed into a corner, and he knew they weren't just fighting for territory. They were fighting for their identity. Ambassador Verrett's face darkened. "Then you leave us no choice. If you refuse to adhere to the rules, we will enforce them. You will face the full force of the Confederacy." Rourke smiled, a slight curl of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. "You can try," she said softly. "But just remember this, the galaxy may have its rules, but humanity makes its own. The Zenthian diplomats exchanged glances again, and in that brief moment, something shifted, a realization, maybe, or the smallest flicker of doubt. Rourke knew that the real battle had only just begun. As the assembly continued, it became clear, humanity wasn't going to be ruled. And if they had to, they would make their own rules, no matter the cost. The stage was set for a conflict that would shake the very foundations of galactic politics. And this time, humanity wasn't backing down. The galaxy had always operated under a system of checks and balances, an unspoken understanding that no single species could upset the delicate harmony of intergalactic order. The Zenthian Confederacy, with its immense military and bureaucratic reach, had been the unquestioned enforcer of these rules. But humanity had never been content to follow, and now, as the humans' defiant stance echoed through the assembly, ripples of uncertainty spread far beyond the walls of the Hall of the Cosmos. Back on Earth, President Angela Rourke's speech had already been broadcast to every major colony and star system under human control. Her words were deliberate, powerful, and resonated with millions of humans who had grown tired of being treated as lesser players in the galactic game. It was the spark needed to ignite a fire that had been smoldering for years, a fire that would soon rage across the galaxy. Within hours, diplomatic channels across the galaxy buzzed with reports, questions, and rumors. The Zenthian Confederacy was in damage control mode. They had never expected a confrontation with humanity to come so soon, and certainly not with such defiance. Their diplomats scrambled to minimize the fallout, offering token gestures of peace, proposing new terms, and even threatening to take drastic action if the humans persisted in their rebellion. But all these efforts were met with the same cold rejection from Earth. The human leadership, led by Rourke and her advisors, knew that they had to act quickly. They could not afford to wait for the Confederacy to strike first. The time for diplomacy was over. The time for human action had arrived. In the vast expanse of space, the first move was made by General Marcus Davis. He had been silently preparing for this moment for years, knowing that humanity's strength wasn't just in its numbers, but in its ingenuity and adaptability. His military forces, scattered across several colonies and outposts, were ready for any order. "We'll need to act fast," Davis said, his voice calm yet urgent, as he stood in the command center of the flagship Eagle's Wing. The enormous ship hovered on the edge of the Sol system, ready to deploy its fleet of ships into action. "We don't have the luxury of time," Rourke agreed. "The Confederacy will retaliate if we don't show them we're serious. Our message must be clear: humans won't bow down." Davis nodded, his eyes scanning the holographic map before him. "Our best option is to show force without overwhelming them. We need to send a message, not start a war, at least not yet." The decision was made. The humans would seize one of the Zenthians' most vital trade routes, a critical junction that connected several key systems. It was an act of defiance, a way to disrupt the flow of resources to the Confederacy, showing them that the humans would no longer follow their dictates. As the Eagle's Wing and its fleet moved toward the contested space, a storm of conflicting messages erupted across the galaxy. While the Zenthian Confederacy scrambled to protect their trade lanes, human leaders in the colonies rallied behind Rourke's bold stand, their voices rising in support of a unified humanity. But not everyone was convinced that such a drastic action was the right course. Among the ranks of Earth's own military, there were whispers of doubt. Some believed that provoking the Confederacy could bring a catastrophic war. Others feared the economic collapse that would follow an outright rejection of galactic law. "Is this really the path we want to take?" Colonel Eliza Garcia, a senior officer in the United Earth Defense Forces, asked as she reviewed the fleet's tactical movements. "If we're not careful, we'll be throwing away everything we've worked for. The Confederacy has resources we can't even comprehend." Davis was undeterred. "Eliza, we've already thrown away everything by accepting their terms for so long. If we don't do this now, we might never have the chance again. Humanity's time is now." His words were firm, and they carried weight. The human military, built on a foundation of fierce independence and adaptability, had come to realize that they were no longer a small player in the cosmic game. They were a rising power, and it was time for the galaxy to recognize it. In the heart of Zenthian space, the first skirmish began. It was brief, sharp, and decisive. The human fleet, led by the Eagle's Wing, intercepted a Zenthian convoy attempting to reinforce the trade route. With surgical precision, the humans disabled the convoy's defenses and seized control of the route. The message had been sent. The Zenthian Confederacy was stunned. They hadn't expected such a bold move so soon. Their retaliation was swift, but they had underestimated humanity's resolve and tactics. With their fleet in disarray and their trade routes compromised, the Confederacy found itself at a crossroads. Diplomacy had failed. The human defiance was not just an isolated incident, it was a challenge to the very foundation of their galactic dominance. And for the first time in centuries, the Confederacy was unsure of how to respond. The galaxy was watching, and the outcome of this confrontation would determine the future of humanity's place in the stars. The spark of rebellion had ignited, and now, there was no turning back. The aftermath of the bold move by humanity rippled across the galaxy, and the effects were felt immediately. The Zenthian Confederacy, once confident in its dominance, found itself reeling from the unexpected and decisive action of the humans. The trade route that had been seized by General Marcus Davis's fleet became a symbol of defiance, a testament to humanity's refusal to bow to the ancient power structures of galactic law. But this defiance came at a cost. The Confederacy, furious at the breach of their controlled space, had quickly mobilized its military forces. Though they had underestimated humanity's resolve, they were not a force to be taken lightly. Within hours of the human attack, Zenthian warships began to pour into the contested region, their vast, sleek forms dotting the stars like a wall of shadows, poised to retake what had been lost. On Earth, President Angela Rourke paced back and forth in her war room, the walls lined with holographic maps of the galaxy. The Zenthian retaliation was inevitable, but the scale of their response was still unknown. She had expected some show of force, but the Confederacy's warships were formidable, and their tactics ruthless. Rourke knew that humanity's initial victory had come at a steep price. The Confederacy had a well-trained, technologically superior military, and humanity was still learning how to fight on this scale. "We can't afford a full-scale war," Rourke said, her voice tight with tension. "Not yet. If they strike back too hard, we risk losing everything. We've made our point, but we need to be smart about how we proceed." Her advisors exchanged uneasy glances. The people were united in their desire to fight, but the military leadership was aware of the delicate balance that now hung in the stars. The galaxy's response was unpredictable. If humanity pressed too hard, it might not only face the wrath of the Zenthian Confederacy but also the ire of other alien empires who had been watching the events unfold with growing concern. On the Eagle's Wing, General Davis stood on the command deck, surveying the incoming data. His fleet had already been in combat for several days, and while they had successfully secured the trade route, their victory had come at a high cost. Several ships had sustained heavy damage, and the losses of human lives, though fewer than the Confederacy's, had been significant. "We need to hold the line," Davis said, his voice a low growl. "We can't let them retake the route. If we do, the message will be clear: humanity is weak, and they can push us around. General, with all due respect, we don't have the resources for a prolonged fight," Colonel Eliza Garcia interjected, her tone steady but filled with concern. "The Zenthian fleet is formidable, and they have reinforcements on the way. We can't sustain this for long without taking heavier losses." Davis turned to face her, his expression grim. "I know. But the moment we back down, we've lost. We won't be able to call ourselves a free species anymore." As the human fleet braced for another assault, Rourke issued a directive that would define the next phase of the conflict. Humanity, for all its defiance, was still vulnerable. They had to outthink their enemies, not just outfight them. "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Rourke announced, her voice calm and resolute. "We will target their supply lines and their communication networks. Without those, the Confederacy can't coordinate their retaliation effectively. It won't be easy, but we have to make them question their ability to continue this war." The humans' first strike was swift and calculated. Small, elite squads of infiltrators, skilled in sabotage and stealth, were sent to cripple the Zenthians' communication hubs on the edge of their empire. These operations, though high risk, were designed to buy humanity the time it needed to regroup and consolidate its position. At the same time, Davis's fleet prepared to launch a series of hit-and-run attacks, harassing the Zenthian fleet and causing as much disruption as possible. The results were immediate. The Zenthian forces were forced to divert valuable resources to protect their communications, and their coordinated response was delayed. In the chaos, a fragile alliance of human colonies seized the opportunity to bolster their defenses and dig in, preparing for what was sure to be a long and costly conflict. But the Zenthian Confederacy was not one to be taken lightly. Within weeks, the first wave of Zenthian reinforcements arrived. Massive dreadnoughts and heavily armored battleships emerged from the folds of space, their engines humming with terrifying power. The human fleets, already stretched thin from the initial skirmishes, were about to face their greatest challenge. Back on Earth, Rourke addressed the galaxy once more, her voice resolute. "This is not just about a trade route," she said, her eyes blazing with conviction. "This is about our right to determine our own future. Humanity will not be crushed by anyone, not the Zenthian Confederacy, not any other empire. We fight not just for our colonies, but for every human who dreams of a place among the stars." Her words rallied the human forces, giving them the strength to endure what was coming next. But deep down, Rourke knew that the coming days would be the darkest humanity had faced in generations. The Confederacy's retaliatory strike was going to test them like never before. And while humans had never been ones to follow the rules, they would soon learn that making their own rules came at a far greater cost than they had ever imagined. The human resistance had been holding, but the arrival of Zenthian reinforcements had tipped the balance. The human fleets, though fierce and determined, now faced a powerful enemy, one with technology and numbers far exceeding their own. The Zenthian dreadnoughts, massive ships bristling with weapons and shields, tore through human defenses like a scythe through wheat. For the first time since the conflict had begun, humanity's will was truly tested. General Marcus Davis stood at the command center of the Eagle's Wing, eyes fixed on the holographic map displaying the positions of the human fleet. The fleet was in retreat, their once proud ships now battered and scattered across the galaxy. The Zenthian war machine was relentless, and the human forces were struggling to maintain their grip on the systems they had conquered. Davis gripped the edge of the command table, his jaw tight with frustration. "We can't hold them off forever," Davis muttered under his breath. "We've lost the momentum. If we don't regroup, we'll be crushed." Rourke's voice crackled through the comms, steady and resolute. "General, we're not done yet. Humanity doesn't surrender." Davis looked up, meeting the eyes of his officers. He could see the doubt in their expressions. The long days of constant combat were starting to wear on them, and morale was beginning to falter. The Zenthian offensive had struck at the heart of human strength, and they were bleeding. Ships were scattered, colonies were at risk, and the once hopeful spark of rebellion was now dimming under the weight of defeat. But Rourke's words rang in his mind: "We fight not for a moment, but for our future." "We're not giving up," Davis said firmly, his voice carrying a tone of quiet determination. "We just need a new plan. Something bold. Something the Zenthian Confederacy won't see coming." Rourke had always believed in the power of humanity's creativity, their ability to adapt, to think outside the box. It was time to turn the tide. Humanity might not have the sheer firepower of the Zenthian warships, but they had something far more dangerous: ingenuity. The next phase of their strategy would involve a shift in tactics. If they couldn't win through brute force, they would win through deception, surprise, and intelligence. Human ships, though smaller and less heavily armed, were faster, more agile, and capable of more unpredictable maneuvers. The humans would no longer engage the Zenthian warships head-on. Instead, they would launch a series of guerrilla-style operations, cutting off supply lines, sabotaging critical infrastructure, and forcing the Zenthian forces to fight on multiple fronts. It wasn't a strategy that would win the war outright, but it could delay the Zenthian advance long enough to give humanity a fighting chance. And it would buy time for the resistance to grow stronger, to rally more allies to their cause. Rourke convened an emergency meeting with her top military advisors. The plan was set into motion. Human ships would take on the role of elusive predators, striking quickly, vanishing before the Zenthian forces could mount a counterattack. "We'll need every advantage we can get," Rourke said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "It's time we learned to fight like the Zenthian Confederacy never expected us to." Meanwhile, in the depths of Zenthian space, Ambassador Verrett and his high-ranking officials were scrambling to contain the growing insurgency. Their fleets had secured the most important systems, but the constant disruptions and attacks from the human resistance were costing them dearly. And the longer the war dragged on, the more their control began to erode. They hadn't expected humanity to be so resilient. "How long can we sustain this, Ambassador?" one of the Zenthian military leaders asked, his tone filled with frustration. "Our fleets are stretched thin. The human ships are small, but they're everywhere. It's almost as if they've learned to fight better than us." Verrett's eyes narrowed. "They're learning. And they're adapting. We underestimated them from the beginning. But we can't afford to falter now. We must crush their resistance before they become too entrenched. The longer this conflict goes on, the more dangerous it becomes." The Zenthian leadership was torn. The longer they delayed, the more likely it became that other species, seeing the human defiance, would be emboldened to challenge the Confederacy's power. If humanity wasn't quickly subdued, their rebellion could spark a galactic wave of unrest that would be impossible to contain. The stage was set for a battle of endurance. Humanity's new guerrilla tactics had the potential to weaken the Zenthians' grip on the galaxy, but it also meant that the conflict would drag on, perhaps for years. There would be no quick resolution. And as both sides prepared for the next phase of war, one thing was clear: humanity was no longer a passive player in the galaxy's great game. Back on Earth, Rourke addressed the people once more. Her words were broadcast across the colonies, a beacon of hope in the midst of growing uncertainty. "The road ahead will not be easy. We will face hardship. We will face loss. But we will not be cowed. Humanity will never be a servant to any empire. This fight is not just for us, it is for every species who dares to defy the will of those who would rule us." And so, humanity entered the second phase of its rebellion, a phase defined by stealth, cunning, and unyielding resolve. The Zenthian Confederacy had been powerful, but now they were up against something they had never truly anticipated: a human spirit that would not break, no matter the cost. In the darkness of space, a new hope began to take shape. And it was a force the Confederacy could not ignore. The war had escalated. The Zenthian Confederacy, though shaken by humanity's unrelenting resistance, was not backing down. Their fleets, enormous and technologically advanced, continued to batter human defenses, and the Zenthian leadership was growing desperate to end the conflict before it spiraled completely out of control. Yet, the longer they fought, the more their advantage began to slip through their fingers. On the other hand, humanity's new tactics were proving successful, if only at great cost. The hit-and-run strikes, the sabotage, the carefully orchestrated attacks on Zenthian supply chains, and the clever use of misdirection had all given the human fleets enough breathing room to regroup, but it came with heavy losses. The resources needed to sustain these operations were dwindling, and the morale of the human forces was beginning to fray. General Marcus Davis sat at the command table on the Eagle's wing, looking over the latest reports. The numbers were grim. Several key fleets had been decimated in recent engagements, and there were signs of serious strain in the remaining human forces. The small, agile ships that had given humanity its edge in guerrilla tactics were not designed to withstand prolonged conflict against the Zenthian dreadnoughts. The losses were mounting, and the human forces were beginning to feel the weight of their resistance. "How long can we keep this up?" Davis muttered, rubbing his temples. He looked up to see Colonel Eliza Garcia, who was standing by, her arms crossed, as if contemplating the same question. "Not much longer, General," Garcia replied, her voice low. "We're running out of time and resources." The Confederacy is bringing in reinforcements from all over their empire. They'll be here soon, and they'll come with everything they've got. Davis sighed, his mind racing. They had accomplished something extraordinary. Humanity had fought back against the largest power in the galaxy. But at what cost? Their fleets were battered, their forces thinning, and the people were starting to question the price of their rebellion. The initial hope and fire that had sparked the war were fading, replaced by the harsh reality of the sacrifices they were making. "We have to hold on," Davis said, trying to maintain his focus. "If we don't, everything we've fought for will be lost. We've made it this far, we can't let the Zenthian Confederacy take the victory now." Meanwhile, on Earth, President Angela Rourke was faced with her own set of challenges. The war had taken a toll on the planet, trade was disrupted, resources were stretched thin, and every corner of the human colonies was bracing for more hardship. The public was still behind her, but the cracks were beginning to show. People were growing tired of the endless battles. The vision of a free humanity in the stars was still alive, but the reality was far more painful than anyone had anticipated. "I never thought it would come to this," Rourke said quietly to her trusted advisor, Director Ethan Tran, as they watched the latest reports of the front lines. "We've pushed the Confederacy this far. But we're running out of options. The Zenthian war machine is too powerful." Tran, a man of few words, placed a hand on the table. "We've survived this long by doing the unexpected. We can't stop now. We have to find a way to turn the tables. They've underestimated humanity. And as long as we don't lose our resolve, we'll show them what happens when you push humans too far." Rourke nodded slowly. She knew what needed to be done, but it would come with immense risk. It was time to play their final card. "I'm sending an envoy to the others," she said, her voice taking on a new edge of determination. "We need to rally every ally we can. This isn't just a fight for Earth anymore. This is a fight for every free species in the galaxy. We can't do it alone." It wasn't just a diplomatic mission, it was a call to arms. Humanity had made its stand, but now they needed allies. The Confederacy had controlled the galaxy for so long that they assumed no one would rise against them. But humanity's rebellion had awakened something across the stars, a spark of defiance in other species who had long been kept under the heel of the Zenthian boot. Now, it was time to forge those alliances into a unified front. In the shadowy corners of the galaxy, the call was heard. The Shulrath, a fierce insectoid species from the border systems, sent their war fleets in response to humanity's plight. The Varkan clans, a scattered group of nomadic traders and mercenaries, pledged their weapons and resources. Even the enigmatic Zealoth, a species known for their high-tech sabotage and espionage, agreed to join the fight, seeing an opportunity to destabilize the Zenthians' monopolistic hold on power. With these new allies rallying around them, humanity was no longer alone. The human fleet, once small and outmatched, was beginning to swell. The Confederacy would be facing not just the humans but a growing coalition of rebellious species, all united in the desire to cast off the Zenthian yoke. However, the Zenthian Confederacy was not idle. They were aware of the growing resistance and the shifting tides. Ambassador Verrett, though still calm and calculating, could sense the danger. His military leaders had given their warnings. The war was beginning to shift in favor of the rebels. If they didn't act soon, they would lose the war. "We must end this, once and for all," Verrett declared to his council, his voice colder than ever. "Prepare the final assault. No more hesitation. We will crush this rebellion before it spreads beyond our control." The Confederacy was mobilizing for a decisive strike, a strike that would determine the future of the galaxy. The next battle would be their greatest yet, a clash that would shape the destiny of not just humanity, but every species that had dared to defy the Zenthian order. But humanity had made its decision, they would not back down. They would fight until their last breath, no matter the cost. The final confrontation loomed. And in the depths of space, the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The final phase of the war had begun. Both sides, battered and bruised, were gearing up for the decisive battle that would determine the future of the galaxy. The Zenthian Confederacy, with its overwhelming numbers and technological superiority, was preparing to strike a crushing blow that would wipe humanity and its growing coalition from the stars. But humanity, emboldened by its newfound alliances, was not about to go down quietly. General Marcus Davis stood at the helm of the Eagle's Wing, the flagship of the human resistance. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes were fierce. The coalition of human, Shulrath, Varkan, and Zealoth forces had grown into a formidable fleet, but they were still outnumbered. The Zenthian war machine was vast, and their fleet was preparing for a final push to erase humanity's defiance once and for all. Davis looked out across the command deck, where his officers and strategists were busy making last-minute adjustments. The fleet was spread across several star systems, and they had the element of surprise on their side. But that would only get them so far. They were still fighting an enemy that controlled the stars with an iron fist. "We don't have the luxury of time," Davis said, his voice low. "This is it. If we fail here, everything is lost. The Confederacy will tighten its grip, and humanity will never be free." Colonel Eliza Garcia, her face set with determination, nodded. "We've come too far to turn back now, General. We've got the numbers, we've got the tactics. It's time we give them a war they'll never forget." Davis turned to the large holographic display that mapped out the battlefield. The Zenthian fleet was massing at the edge of human-controlled space, preparing for their final assault. But what the Zenthian High Command didn't realize was that humanity had one last trick up its sleeve, a daring, high-risk strike aimed at crippling the Confederacy's command and control. "We have to hit them hard and fast," Davis said. "I want all fighter squadrons in position. We'll strike at their command ships first. If we can break their chain of command, the whole fleet will falter. Then, we push them back." The human coalition had spent the last several weeks preparing for this moment. They had forged new alliances, pooled their resources, and shared their technologies. The Shulrath had provided advanced bioships capable of stealth maneuvers, while the Varkan clans had offered weapon systems and shielding technology that could stand up to Zenthian firepower. The Zealoth, masters of subterfuge, had provided invaluable intelligence and espionage operations that allowed humanity to track the Zenthian fleet's every move. As the fleets gathered for the battle, President Angela Rourke addressed the galaxy once more. Her voice echoed across the star systems, a rallying cry for every species who had joined humanity's fight for freedom. "Today, we fight not just for ourselves, but for every species oppressed by the Zenthian Confederacy. We fight for the right to choose our own path, for the future of all who seek peace in the stars. We will stand together, or we will fall apart. But as long as we stand, they will never break us." The final battle began as the Zenthian warships emerged from the darkness of space. Massive dreadnoughts, their weapons blazing, cut through the void with devastating firepower. The first shots rang out, and the battle erupted with a fury unmatched by anything humanity had faced before. The human coalition's fleets, though smaller, fought with unmatched tenacity and grit, harrying the Zenthian ships with lightning-fast strikes and evasive maneuvers. Human fighters, agile and fast, darted between the hulking Zenthian ships, targeting weak points in their defenses and slipping away before they could be caught. The Shulrath ships, cloaked in shadow, snuck past enemy lines to take out critical targets with surgical precision. The Zealoth spies infiltrated Zenthian communications, sowing confusion and creating chaos within their ranks. And the Varkan warships, though few, were the heart of the resistance, holding their ground against the Zenthian behemoths with an intensity that left their enemies stunned. But the battle was not without its cost. The Zenthian fleet was relentless, and their counterattacks were brutal. Humanity's ships were outclassed in sheer power, and the casualties mounted. One by one, human ships were torn apart by Zenthian fire, their crews fighting valiantly until the last breath. The cries of the fallen echoed through the communication channels, but humanity's resolve only grew stronger. "Hold the line," Davis shouted over the comms. "We're almost there. Keep pushing." As the battle raged on, the human coalition launched their final assault, a direct strike at the heart of the Zenthian command fleet. With their cloak of surprise still intact, the Coalition's ships launched a daring raid on the Zenthian flagship, the Van Tor, a ship of immense size and firepower. They knew that if they could take down the Van Tor, the entire Zenthian fleet would lose its coordination, its sense of unity, and its strategic edge. The human ships poured fire into the Van Tor, their smaller vessels darting around the massive ship, striking where they could. The Zenthian commanders aboard the flagship scrambled to defend, but they were unprepared for the coordinated strike. Explosions rocked the hull as the human fleet pressed forward with all the fury of a species that had nothing left to lose. Then, just as the Zenthian flagship seemed to be on the verge of collapse, the unimaginable happened. The Van Tor exploded in a brilliant burst of light, sending shockwaves through the surrounding space. The Zenthian fleet, now leaderless and in disarray, faltered. The human coalition pressed forward, seizing the opportunity to exploit the confusion and break the Zenthian lines. The tide of the battle shifted. The Zenthian warships, once so confident in their dominance, were now scrambling to regroup. The human fleet, battered and bloodied, pushed forward with everything they had left. The Confederacy's hold on the galaxy was slipping, and the human resistance, against all odds, was on the brink of victory. But even as the Confederacy's defeat seemed imminent, General Davis knew this was not the end. This battle was only the beginning of something much larger. The Zenthian Confederacy was not simply going to fade into the shadows. The galaxy had been shaken by humanity's defiance, but the real war was about to begin. And in the heart of space, the storm that had been brewing for so long finally broke. The battle was over. The Zenthian flagship, Van Tor, lay in ruins, and with it, the heart of the Zenthian fleet had been shattered. The human coalition had won a stunning victory, but the war was far from over. The Confederacy's remaining fleets were in disarray, and the once unshakable empire was beginning to crack under the weight of the rebellion. But in the silence of the aftermath, as the stars burned bright above the wreckage of both fleets, General Marcus Davis knew that the true struggle had just begun. The human resistance had proven that it could strike down the seemingly invincible. Humanity's defiance had rallied allies from across the galaxy and set the stage for an uprising that would change the future of the galaxy. But while victory was within reach, there was still the question of what came next. The Confederacy might have been temporarily weakened, but their power, their empire, their ambition, these were not things that would simply disappear. On the Eagle's wing, General Davis stood before his officers, surveying the damage. His face was etched with the marks of exhaustion, but his eyes burned with the fire of victory. "We've done it," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of all that had come before. "We've struck a blow that will echo across the stars. But the war isn't over. This victory, it's only the beginning." Colonel Eliza Garcia nodded, her face grim. "The Zenthian Confederacy will regroup. We've put a crack in their armor, but it's not enough to shatter them completely. They'll be back." "Not if we make sure they don't have the chance," Davis replied, his tone resolute. "We need to make this the beginning of something bigger, something permanent." Humanity, now with the support of the Shulrath, Varkan, and Zeleth, had become the symbol of resistance in the galaxy. It was no longer just a rebellion, it was a movement. The fall of the Van Tor had not only crippled the Confederacy's military, it had shattered the perception of invincibility that had held the galaxy in its grip for so long. President Angela Rourke stood before a crowd of millions on Earth, her speech broadcasted across every system still under human control. Her face was a reflection of the weight of leadership, but it also bore the unmistakable determination of a leader who had led humanity to victory against overwhelming odds. Today, Rourke's voice rang clear, "We stand not just as humans, but as a beacon for all those who dream of a future free from tyranny. We have proven that even the greatest of empires can fall, that no force, no matter how vast, can stand against the will of the people. We are the future of this galaxy, and together, we will build a new order." The galaxy, once ruled by the iron fist of the Zenthian Confederacy, was beginning to change. Humanity's victory had sparked a fire of rebellion in the hearts of many species, from the furthest reaches of known space to the unexplored fringes where sentient life had quietly lived under the Confederacy's shadow for eons. But there was still work to be done. The Zenthian Empire had not yet fallen, and the pieces of their fractured command were already moving to try and reassert control. Though their fleets were scattered and their leadership in chaos, the Confederacy was not a force to be taken lightly. Its roots were deep, its resources vast. This was not a victory that humanity or its allies could afford to squander. Back on the front lines, General Davis and Colonel Garcia began to formulate their next steps. They knew that the final battle, the one that would free the galaxy from the Zenthian yoke, was still ahead. It would take more than skirmishes and raids. It would take a decisive, coordinated effort to take down the Confederacy's remaining power structures, to crush their command, and to ensure they would never rise again. "We have to hit them where it hurts," Garcia said, her mind already racing with the possibilities. "Their central worlds. Their supply chains. We need to disrupt their ability to rebuild, to rally." Davis nodded. "And we'll need to take the fight to their home systems. We'll make them understand that the galaxy is no longer their domain. That humanity, and all those who have joined us, are not just fighting to survive. We're fighting to take back what's ours." The final push began. The coalition forces, their numbers swelling with new allies from across the galaxy, launched a series of high-risk raids against Zenthian strongholds. The Confederacy's central worlds, once considered untouchable, were now under siege. The human resistance fought with all the fury and determination that had been their trademark since the first shot was fired. The tides of war had shifted, and there was no turning back. The Zenthian leaders, realizing their empire was crumbling, scrambled for any means of survival. But it was too late. Their warships, their armies, their grand plans, they could not withstand the growing alliance of rebel species led by humanity. Every victory led to another, until the Zenthian capital world itself was in sight. And when the final battle arrived, it was not just humanity that stood at the gates of the Zenthian capital, but a united galaxy, one that would no longer bow to the will of any empire. The Zenthian Confederacy, once a dominant force in the galaxy, was finally brought to its knees. The last remnants of the Zenthian leadership were captured or destroyed, and the galaxy entered a new age, an age of freedom, cooperation, and peace. The galaxy would never forget the price of victory, the sacrifices made, and the unwavering will of humanity and its allies to break the chains of tyranny. In the end, the Confederacy had underestimated humanity. They had forgotten one crucial thing: humanity did not follow rules set by others. Humanity made its own. And as the stars glistened above the worlds now free from oppression, it was clear that a new era had dawned, an era where humanity, once an afterthought in the galactic hierarchy, would shape the future. The galaxy was theirs to mold, and they would not be governed by the hands of any empire again.